Washoe County Library System welcomes you to our monthly series from the Nevada Historical Society presents High Noon with Neil Cobb. This afternoon's topic is Stories of Reno in World War II, presented by Chuck Weller. My name is Jennifer, and I'm happy to be with you here today. And now I would like to introduce Sherry Hayes Zorn with the Nevada Historical Society. Again, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, as always. We always want to thank the Washoe County Libraries for helping us share these great history talks to you, and you can watch them at any time. So we so appreciate you joining us today to hear our latest talk here for November. We love doing this program, and as always, I love to thank Neil Cobb, who is our host with the most. But no, Neil has been a longtime supporter here at the Nevada Historical Society, and we have his amazing collection here. And Neil is always going out into the community and sharing history and helping let people know about what the Historical Society does. And so we greatly appreciate it. So without further ado, let me introduce our honorary curator, Neil Cobb. Hey, Neil.
Hey, thanks for the intro. It's my pleasure today to introduce Chuck Weller. Chuck had received his undergraduate degree from St. Joseph's College in Philadelphia, a Juris Doctorate, from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and a master's degree and PhD from the University of Nevada. He practiced law in Reno from 1982 through 2004. He hosted a weekly talk program on KKOH, Chuck Weller and the Law, from 1991 to 2004. He wrote a weekly legal advice column in the Reno Gazette Journal from 2001 to 2004. He served 3 elected terms as a district judge in Reno from 2005 to 2021, and continues to serve as a senior judge. He has been published on a variety of law-related and Nevada World War II-related subjects. He is a historian for the Reno chapter of the United States Navy League. His upcoming book, Nevada During World War II, is scheduled to be released during 2024. At this time, we welcome Chuck Weller, Judge Chuck Weller.
Well, thank you, Neil. And I want to start out by thanking the Washoe County Library System and the Nevada Historical Society and Neil Cobb for inviting me here to talk to you today about some subjects that I care about a great deal. One is the history of the state of Nevada, and the second is I have an abiding interest in World War II history. And I've written a book about Nevada during World War II, because, as I say, for a long time, I've been interested in both subjects. Nevada and World War II is really important to us today. Although America's entry into the war was a long time ago, 82 years ago next month, the world in which we live today is largely a reflection of America's victory in that war. Nevada's contribution has been little written about in the 82 years since that war. When I accepted the invitation to speak here today, I anticipated that my book was going to be published and out by now. However, the University of Nevada Press, which is the publisher, tells me that it won't appear until June of 2024. Today, what I want to do is share with you a taste of the history that book covers. I'm going to say little about combat and focus on what people living in this state thought and experienced. But first, a little background. How did we get into World War II? America declared war after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. But the threat of war existed years before. Japan had been fighting in China for several years and had taken over much of the country and all of the main ports of that country. In Europe, Hitler and his Nazis had taken over almost the entire European continent. And they were, at the time of America's entry into the war, they were fighting with England and the Soviet Union. It was clear that these unbeaten dictatorships of Japan and Germany were interested in world domination. And it was clear that America was next and that America might end up fighting alone. Before the war, America's army had 200,000 men in it. That was less than 25% of the size of Poland's army, which the Germans had conquered in 2 weeks. We were in danger. To address this danger, before the United States entered into the war, Congress passed the first peacetime draft in American history. Nevada at the time was the least populated of all the states. We had a total population of our state, right around 110,000 people. And coincidentally, the state is composed of 110,000 square miles. So our population density was about 1 person per square mile. More than 80% of the state was owned by the federal government. There was no paved highway, direct railroad route, or scheduled airline service between North and South Nevada. 3 out of every 5 Nevadans were ranchers, cowboys, miners, or small town folks living in settlements with populations of less than 2,500. The biggest community in the state was Reno. Reno had a population of 21,000 people. Las Vegas at the time had a population of 8,000 people. And the power in the state at that time was clearly in the north. The county and the state of Nevada were coming out of what has been called the Great Depression, a financial disaster that lasted for more than 10 years. The stock market crashed by more than 75%. The unemployment rate never dipped under 14% for a decade. The abundance that we know today, with lots of food and lots of materials, that just didn't exist at that time. The population of the entire country was 130 million people. During World War II, 16 million men served in uniform, about 1 out of every 8 Americans. And almost all of the young men in their late teens and early 20s. A severe manpower shortage existed because these people were taken away from their normal pursuits. They didn't have jobs. They weren't producing on farms. They weren't producing anywhere. They were training to fight. Okay? And as a result, there was a shortage of workers everywhere. And these men that were in the military needed to be fed and otherwise supplied, and they needed to be armed for war all over the world. This meant that the people in America and in Nevada had to do with less, and they had to dedicate what they had to the war effort, because it was critical that this huge army that we created was able to win the war. It was a total war. If you were born after 1945, you've never experienced what that means. Again, I'm talking about life on the home front and not on the battlefield. Since World War II, we've had wars in Korea, Vietnam, and the Middle East. And for the most part, unless you had someone in the military, you really didn't notice very much that those wars were going on. You lived your life. But during World War II, every person, every family was involved in the war effort. One thing that involved every person involved in the war was rationing. In order to fairly share the reduced availability of almost everything was rationed. Food was rationed, shoes were rationed, clothes were rationed, tires, gasoline, and some things weren't available at all. Automobiles, for example, 1 month after Pearl Harbor, American industry stopped producing cars and would not resume producing cars until after the defeat of Germany 3.5 years later. Automobile plants were converted into the manufacture of weapons of war, tanks, jeeps. Places that used to make typewriters made guns. American industry was harnessed for the war effort. I want to tell you a little bit about how rationing worked. Every person and every family had to fill out forms claiming how much they had of a particular item, how many cars they or how many tires they had, how many canned goods they had, and that determined what you were going to be able to purchase. The first thing that was rationed in the United States was sugar, and the second thing was coffee, and eventually almost everything was rationed. And during the war, 4 ration books were issued to every person in the United States. This happens to be a ration book that my father had received when he was a young man. And within the ration book were stamps. And say, for example, that you were entitled to buy 3 cans of food this month. You had to go to the store, give the seller the money for the store, and also the correct ration stamp to allow you to purchase those cans. If you didn't have a ration stamp or the money, you couldn't buy it. And if you used your ration stamps, you were not able to purchase additional foods at all. One thing, for example, that was rationed during the war was gasoline. At the beginning of the war, most people were allowed to buy 4 gallons of gasoline a month. This was at a time when cars averaged 14 miles a gallon. Later in the war, that was reduced to 3 gallons a month per week. I said per month, I meant per week. That was reduced to 3 gallons per week and further reduced to 2 gallons per week. The idea was that you weren't to drive. That gasoline needed to be used for our fighting men, for our war effort. The same with tires. You couldn't get, if your tires blew out, you couldn't get a replacement unless you convinced a tire rationing board that you were entitled to have a tire. Same with bicycles, the same with many, many other things. And it wasn't easy to convince a rationing board that you were entitled to things. For example, during the Second World War, the airport at what we now call Stead was built. There was public transportation to get to Stead. As a result, nobody who worked on the construction of that base could get any tires for their cars. If their tires blew out, that was too bad. Okay, those people didn't need tires. There were other things that people did because of shortages at that time as well. Another thing that happened is we didn't have enough metal. We didn't have enough aluminum. We didn't have enough steel. We didn't have enough rubber. And partly the reason was because our access to those commodities were cut off by the war. Submarines stopped almost all rubber import to the United States. Enemy submarines did that. So we had scrap drives all over America where you could contribute anything that you had, aluminum, paper, rags, anything. All these things were collected, and today we would call it recycling, and were used to produce weapons of war. Everybody was encouraged to have a victory garden. to supplement their food supply so that food would be available to our troops, and not only our troops, but to our allies, because America was in sort of a blessed position. We had two moats, the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, that protected us almost completely from direct involvement in the war and the warfare. Our allies, Germany, England, they were bombed. They were invaded. They had much more trouble than we did producing the weapons of war and the foodstuffs necessary to sustain troops. And therefore, our people provided not only for ourselves, but also for our allies. This before you right now is a quote from the President of the United States, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I would rather pay 100% of taxes now than push the burden of this war onto the shoulders of my grandchildren. Too bad he isn't here today, because that's what we do with wars now. But that's not what the attitude was of the people of the Second World War period. When war came, taxes were raised to pay for the war. The highest tax rate that existed during World War II in the United States was 88%. There was a 5% victory tax on top of normal taxes. The idea of taxes being taken out of your paycheck every time you receive a paycheck rather than send in a big check at the end of the year, that started during World War II, because we needed the money to pay for the war. And the taxes that the people paid, taxes to beat the Axis, is what they called it. The Germany, Japan, and Italy were called the Axis powers. So taxes to beat the Axis paid for 50% of the cost of the war as it occurred. And the cost of the war was astronomical in those days. The other 50% of the cost of the war was paid by loans. This is a picture this is a picture of Jack Dempsey. He's the one in uniform. Jack Dempsey was the former heavyweight champion of the world. And on the far right, that's a picture of Ernest Brooks, who was the Washoe County bond chairman and also the owner of Model Dairy. Bonds were for sale all the time. This is a bond booth where bonds were available. Kids were encouraged to buy war bond stamps, and everybody did. Not only was it necessary to help finance the war, but it also induced a feeling of patriotism among the people. And there are a few pictures of that. This is a picture of the Majestic Theater in Reno, Nevada, and a war bond sale in its lobby. This is a picture from Las Vegas, a bond sale on Hitler's birthday. Any occasion to sell bonds was taken, and people took it as a patriotic duty to buy bonds. One of the great contributions, perhaps the greatest contribution that Nevada made to the war, was its tremendous mineral wealth. Nevada had more minerals that were important to the war than any other state. And just as today, it appears that we're going to have the minerals that are necessary to make the batteries necessary to power our cars. In those days, we had the minerals that the country needed. One mineral that the country needed desperately was magnesium. The landing gear on an airplane made of steel weighs about 1,000 pounds. The same landing gear made of magnesium weighed 240 pounds. We needed magnesium so that we could make planes that could fly higher, carry more bombs. And the difference between a plane made of steel and magnesium was the difference between victory and defeat, the difference between life and death. The largest magnesium deposit known to exist in the world at that time was located in central Nevada at a town that is today called Gabbs. That ore needed to be processed into magnesium metal. That processing procedure required tremendous amounts of water and electricity, neither of which were available in central Nevada. And so a site needed to be identified. The site needed to be far enough from the boundaries of the United States so that it would be safe from attack. And it needed to have, as I say, two resources, water and electricity. And a site was selected halfway between Las Vegas and Hoover Dam because electricity and water were available there. The desert was an empty place. There was nothing there. Today, the name of that place is Henderson, the second largest city in the state of Nevada. But at the beginning of the war, there was nothing there. A plant was being created. It was called Basic Magnesium Inc. And what these two guards are standing in front of is big pieces, billets of magnesium that had been produced. During the war, the plant at Henderson produced more magnesium than any other plant on the earth. Because most of the men were gone, many of the jobs at the magnesium plant were handled by women. In addition, many Black Americans were brought into the state of Nevada to work. At the beginning of the war, 94% of the residents of the state of Nevada were white. 4% were Indian, and less than 1% were Asian, Hispanic, or Black. The war diversified our population. Blacks couldn't get jobs in the American South where they lived because of discrimination that they had suffered. In fact, slavery continued to exist, all but in name, from after the Civil War. And so when we needed people to work in Nevada's factories, and we couldn't get men because they were away at war, we turned to groups that were previously disfavored in employment, women and Blacks. And both the population of Las Vegas and the population of Hawthorne, that I'm going to get to in just a moment, experienced significant increases in Black population as a result of a law that prohibited racial discrimination in war industries. In Las Vegas and Hawthorne are the places where Americans' greatest war industries were. There was a famous plane back in those days called the Memphis Belle. The Memphis Belle was famous because it survived a lot of missions. Many, many people that flew planes in World War II were killed, and it was unusual for somebody to complete their missions. I think at the time of this picture, 25 missions were necessary. A mission would require you to fly over enemy territory with anti-aircraft guns firing at you and fighter planes attacking you, and deliver your bombs and get back alive. The Memphis Belle was one of the first planes to do that, and they brought it back to the United States and put it on tour because it aroused patriotism. This is a picture of the Memphis Belle and its crew at Basic Magnesium in what's now called Henderson, with the manager of the plant holding a bar of magnesium with a sign on it that says, "From Basic Magnesium to Berlin via the Memphis Belle." Another mineral that was important during the Second World War was silver. We needed copper to make bullets and bullet casings, and we didn't need silver. Silver had some, but limited applicability to the war effort. Gold, for example, wasn't needed at all. The United States had the world's largest collection of gold at Fort Knox in Kentucky. The United States also had the world's largest collection of silver at a depository at West Point in New York. During the war, we needed copper a lot more than we needed gold, and we needed silver. Silver happens to be an excellent electrical conductor, better than copper. But silver isn't used in electrical components because its value is so much higher than that of copper. And so typically, in normal circumstances, we use copper to make electrical components. During World War II, the copper had a higher use, making weapons. And so silver was used in the place of copper in limited circumstances. This is a picture of Senator Pat McCarran, Nevada's Senator Pat McCarran and his wife. Many things in Nevada are named after McCarran. McCarran Boulevard, McCarran Airport in Las Vegas until recently, when it was renamed for Senator Harry Reid. What he's holding is a plank of silver. Most of the silver that was at West Point was from Nevada. It was brought back. A lot of it was brought back for use in building electrical components for basic magnesium ink in Henderson. Another place that silver was used was in the battleship, the USS Nevada. It was damaged severely at Pearl Harbor, and a lot of its electrical components were destroyed. They were replaced with silver. Another place that silver was used during the war and that would have normally used copper was with the Manhattan Project, the process by which the atomic bomb was first created. The amount of silver, and most of this was Nevada silver, the amount of silver that was used to create the atomic bomb is staggering. Imagine a football field covered by a slab of silver, the entire field, and the slab is 1 foot thick. That's how much silver was used in the creation of the atomic bomb in lieu of copper. Another really significant Nevada contribution to the war was the Naval Ammunition Depot at Hawthorne. It happened about 20 years before the war that America's biggest naval ammunition depot was destroyed. It was in New Jersey, and it was destroyed by fire and explosions. And they decided they needed a place to put it where it could be safer. There were two places that were being looked at. One was Hurlong, California, and the other was Hawthorne, Nevada. There was a senator at the time, Senator Tasker Oddie from Nevada, who was on the Naval Appropriations Committee. At the time, California wanted to build a bridge, which exists today and is known as the Golden Gate Bridge. The Senate Appropriations Committee was concerned that that bridge might create a problem in the event of war. If it was knocked down, it might lock the fleet inside, or if the fleet was outside, it might lock the fleet outside. Senator Oddie came up with a report that voiced those concerns. In those days, senators used to compromise together, and the senators from California and from Nevada got together and decided that the risk to the fleet would be lessened if the Naval Ammunition Depot was built behind the protective barrier of the Sierra Mountains. And so Nevada got the ammunition depot at Hawthorne. It was then, and it is today, the world's largest ammunition depot. It supplied most of the armaments that went to the Navy for the war in the Pacific. And there as well, women were a large part of the workforce. There's a picture of a woman. When I saw this photo, I thought it was a fake. This woman's got nice clothes on. She's wearing jewelry. She's got her shoes off. But I'm told that this is not a fake. I mean, this was a woman. What she's working on and what the previous picture showed were something called hedgehogs. A hedgehog was a device that sat on the front of a ship and would launch 32 bombs into the water, as opposed to one depth charge being dropped on a submarine. A hedgehog would send 32 bombs into the water simultaneously in an effort to sink enemy submarines. Another major military base in the state of Nevada during the World War II was at Tonopah. Tonopah was under construction on December 7th, 1942, when the war started, and the order came down that they were to start operations immediately. And that cold winter, when everything was supposed to start right away, the people who were operating the plant didn't call it Hawthorne right away. They called it by the name that's set forth on this sign, as they lived in tents during that first winter of the war. At Hawthorne, B-25 airplanes, 4-engine bombers, people were trained to fly in those 4-engine bombers. The population of Hawthorne at the beginning of the war was less than 1,000. Suddenly, there were 6,000 military men there. This is a picture of B-24s from Hawthorne flying over Lake Tahoe during World War II. In Las Vegas, the country's first flexible gunnery school was created. Today, we call it Nellis Air Force Base. Flexible gunnery was, they were teaching people to stand in bomber planes that were wildly flying as fast as they could and shoot at fighter planes attempting to shoot down the bombers and to shoot where the bomber was going to, the fighter was going to be when the bullet got there. It was called flexible gunnery because the guns were movable, everything was movable. The reason that Nevada was chosen for these bases is because it existed far enough from the California coast that it was behind a protective mountain range. Also, Nevada is blessed with blue sky. Not in this picture, but Nevada is blessed with a lot of blue sky. Nevada is also blessed with a lot of open space where if somebody learning to fly an airplane needs to sit down, you find a place to sit down. And also, Nevada was a place where if you wanted to use a weapon that was going to shoot a long way and be very lethal, you could do that without risk to hitting people or structures or communities. More than 10% of the landmass of the state was given over to military bases and bombing and firing ranges during the war. This is an amazing story here. The average American soldier was 5'8" tall and weighed 144 pounds. A third had attended only elementary school. Men could be drafted who had only one eye, or were deaf in one ear, or had no teeth, or were missing a thumb or 3 fingers. We needed men in the military. As I said, 16 million in a country that had a total population of 130 million were in uniform during the war. This is 2 people who became American soldiers. This is 2 guys from Fallon. On our left is Bruce Van Voorhees, and on our right is his brother Wayne. The occasion is Bruce is graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland. Wayne joined the Army before America got involved in the war. He was sent to the Philippines. When the war started, the Japanese not only attacked Pearl Harbor, but they attacked all over the Pacific. America had a lot of troops in the Philippines, and they were cut off from support from America. And most of them ended up hunkering down on a peninsula near Manila called Bataan, the Bataan Peninsula. Wayne was on the Bataan Peninsula. Forced to give up, the troops there were marched north in what goes down in history known as the Bataan Death March. The Japanese were savage. They executed people for no reason. They cut people's heads off for no reason. It was terrible. And when they got to prisoner of war camps, they weren't treated very well at all. Wayne died of malaria in the prisoner of war camp there. His mother didn't know that. She received a telegram from the War Department saying that he was missing. She didn't learn until after the war was over. 3 years later, did she get a telegram saying that her son had died. When Bruce, the man on the left in uniform, when he learned that his brother was missing in the Pacific, he asked to be assigned to the Pacific. And he was. He was a pilot. He flew off of aircraft carriers. He flew off of land. This is a picture of Bruce, a painting of Bruce. Bruce was in the Solomon Islands on an island maybe you've heard of called Guadalcanal. He flew with his plane 800 miles north to the top range of the Solomon Island chain. And it was a suicide mission. The plane made 6 passes, destroying 3 enemy airplanes, a radio transmitting station, lots of troops, and he helped protect the men, American soldiers and sailors, from attack from that base. During the war, as I told you earlier, 16 million men served in American uniforms. 472 of them received the Medal of Honor. Bruce was one of those 472. The flight field at Fallon is named after him, Van Voorhees Field. Lots of other things were too. There's a ship that was named after him. There's a unit of Sea Cadets in Las Vegas today that still uses his name. A few years ago, when President Trump was giving the graduation address at Annapolis, Maryland, at the Naval Academy, he told the story of Bruce Van Voorhees from Nevada. This is another Nevadan. This guy's name is Morris Jepson. In this picture, he's 23 years old. He grew up in Carson City, and he was a smart guy. He started at the University of Nevada, but when the Army got him, they sent him to MIT and Harvard and a bunch of schools. He was very bright, and he became a physicist. This is the monument to the 509th Composite Group that trained in Wendover. Now, Wendover is an odd city. It's partially in Nevada, and it's partially in Utah. In Utah, the things that go on in Nevada are sins. In Nevada, they're businesses. When they were looking for a place, when Colonel Paul Tibbets, who piloted the first plane that dropped an atomic bomb, was looking for a place to train in secret, he picked Wendover. And it was because it was so isolated. In fact, the comedian Bob Hope, when he went to Wendover, looked around and said they should rename this place Leftover. When the plane flew to Hiroshima to drop the first atomic bomb, the man who armed that bomb was Morris Jepson from Carson City. This is Morris Jepson standing next to the plane, Enola Gay, on August 6, 1945, before climbing into that plane, flying from Tinian Island to Hiroshima, arming the bomb en route, and dropping the first atomic bomb used. Maybe some of you recognize this picture. This used to be a church on Plumas Avenue here in Reno. And then it was converted into a bank. And now there's a business operating in it. And it started out as a chapel in Stead, Nevada, north of Reno in Lemon Valley. The base that was built at Stead did many things during the war. One thing that it did was it trained people to fly the hump. As I mentioned earlier, the coastal areas of China were taken over by the Japanese, but China was our ally during the war, and we couldn't access the Chinese to supply them through the natural area, through their ports. And the road between everywhere and China were no good. And so the way to supply the Chinese was to fly over the highest part of the Himalaya mountains. They called it the hump. Many planes crashed there. To train to fly the hump, people came to Stead. They used the mountains around Nevada, around Reno, to practice loading planes, flying planes over mountainous areas in preparation for flying the hump. When the war was over, buildings from Stead were moved to different places around the state, and the chapel from this chapel became that business on Plum that I showed you a moment ago. Not everything, we hear about the greatest generation and you hear about, wonderful things, but not everything was wonderful. One terrible thing that happened during the Second World War is that people of Japanese extraction, whether they were American citizens or not, were put into concentration camps. Some people object to that name, but that's a name that President Roosevelt used to describe them. We were at war with Germany, Italy, and Japan, but we couldn't lock up all the Germans. There were too many of them, millions. We couldn't lock up all the Italians. There were too many of them. There were millions. But the Japanese were a more distinct unit. There were only about 110,000 people of Japanese ancestry in the United States, and they were all pretty much located upon the West Coast. And so it was possible to lock them up. And we called it, they were interned during the war. The internment had more than one step. The first step was the Army ordered the people to leave the West Coast voluntarily. Again, there were about 110,000 of them. And they didn't all leave voluntarily. About 5,000 did. And the rest were still there. And the Army decided that they were going to remove them forcibly. Nevada was not a tolerant place. This map shows all of the sites that were involved in the internment of the Japanese. Some of them were temporary imprisonments. Some were more permanent imprisonments. But that's what this was. This is a map of those places. I refer in my book to this looking like a donut. And the hole in the middle is the state of Nevada. Intolerant Nevada housed no Japanese that were removed from the West Coast. In fact, the president of the University of California wrote to the president of the University of Nevada and said, listen, I've got all these students, they're American citizens, and they're being required to move from the state of Nevada. Will you take them into your university there in Nevada? And the answer was no. There were three groups of Japanese that were important during the war in Nevada. The copper miners of White Pine County, who were treated terribly. And it wasn't part of the national internment effort, but I mean, they were just treated terribly. There were many suicides in that group. There were people who had lived in Nevada for a long time and were accepted by their communities, and they didn't have nearly such a bad time. And there were the people forced to leave from California. And as I say, Nevada would have nothing to do with them, which is why this map looks like what it looks like. On the day that Pearl Harbor was bombed, there was a couple in the state of Nevada from California who were here to get married. Nevada was an easy place to get married. So on Sunday, December 7th, they were here to get married. And then it was announced that Pearl Harbor was bombed. And they couldn't get on a bus. And they couldn't get in a hotel. And they had nowhere to go and nowhere to get home. No way to get home. And so the police allowed them to stay at the jail until they arranged their own transportation. Nevada was attacked a couple of times during the war. The Japanese launched balloon bombs that traveled across the Pacific Ocean on the jet stream. They weren't very well guided missiles, but they had an equipment that was operated by a barometer. During the heat of the day, the gas would expand and the balloon would rise. And during the cool of the night, as the gas cooled, it would drop. And every time it dropped something. The number of days it was anticipated for it to cross the ocean, it would drop a sandbag. And when they anticipated it would be over land, it dropped fire bombs, incendiary bombs, and also an anti-personnel bomb. Over 10,000 of these things were launched against the United States during the war, and over 1,000 of them reached the United States. I have records of 8 that came down in Nevada. The first one ever to come down in the state of Nevada is this one. It was found near Yerington by a farmer, Charles Ragsdale. He tied it to the bumper of his car, drove it back to his corral, tied it to the fence, and his wife took this picture. And the picture is on display at the library in Yerington. Another time that Nevada was attacked during the war is identified in this article. Nevada bomb, missile hits near house. You know where the Stonehouse restaurant is on Plumas? Well, just south of that, a bomb exploded during the war. It was a practice bomb. It only weighed about 50 pounds. Nobody took credit for it, but I suspect that it was from Tonopah, and it dropped there. It blew up. It created a crater. Fortunately, no one was injured. The University of Nevada, during the war, almost dropped out of existence. The population of students dropped by 2/3. But it was then used by the Army and by the Navy to train cadets there. These people are already in the military, but they're at the university with the hope that they will become officers in the future. Everybody participated in the war effort. This is a picture of the casino that operated in the Nevada State Prison during the war. The prisoners were as patriotic as anybody else. They contributed to buying war bonds. The laws were changed so that people who were convicted felons could join the military. The law was changed so that people on parole could join the military. So the non-scary people were allowed to join the war, and many did. The war meant that the sheep industry of Nevada almost went under. Spain never participated in the war. And so when Basque sheep herders in Nevada knew that there were Basque sheep herders in Spain who were willing to come to Nevada to tend our sheep, Senator McCarran, who was a sheep herder himself, helped arrange that. This is a photograph of non-English speaking sheep herders from the Basque regions of Spain arriving in Reno to work in our far-flung areas. I see that we're running out of time. This is a picture of at Hoover Dam. To cross the dam, you had to go through an armed convoy. This is a picture of the dam I took. You can see it today. Here at the top, you notice that there's something up there. It's a bunker that was built during World War II. Here's a close-up of that bunker. Here's a picture of the inside of the bunker. This was designed for people with machine guns to protect Hoover Dam from Japanese attack. And as you can see from this picture, the bunker had a commanding view. People of the state of Nevada were proud of their contributions to the war effort. There was an admiral, Admiral Halsey, famous during the war. And he announced that when he got to Japan, he wanted to ride the Emperor's white horse. And so the people of the state of Nevada commissioned this saddle for him. It was delivered to him in the Pacific Ocean right at the end of the war. It was on the battleship Missouri when the Japanese came aboard and signed surrender documents. Here's a picture of the Admiral with the saddle. On September 2nd, 1945, when the Japanese signed surrender documents aboard the USS Missouri, the ship wanted to commemorate the end of the war, a really historic event. But it's a ship. They couldn't make a missile. They couldn't make a statue. What could they make? They made a postcard. And what's on the postcard from that day at that time? The picture of Admiral Halsey's saddle from the people of Washoe County. That saddle came back to the state of Nevada, and it's now on long-term loan from the museum at Annapolis, Maryland, to the Nevada State Museum in Carson City. Now, the book I've written has a number of other things that I'd like you to know about. It has the most complete list of men and women who were killed, wounded, or made prisoners of war during the war. Again, I say that it'll be out in June. This is just a taste of what's in that book. There were more than 60 ships that were named after people or places in the state of Nevada. They're described. Also described are 3 admirals who came from Reno, landlocked Reno, and 4 generals from the state of Nevada, and dozens of other people, and dozens of airplanes named after things that happened in the state. It's my pleasure to research this stuff, and it's my pleasure to share some of it with you, and I'm pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
That was wonderful, Chuck. That was a great presentation, and there was a lot that I learned as well today. I know when we had for a while, we had the Halsey saddle at the Historic Society, and you gave a talk many years ago, and it's the saddle is quite lovely. So would you talk a little bit about the saddle?
Yes, as I say, the Admiral Halsey said that he wanted to ride the horse, because every time the emperor was pictured, he was pictured on a white horse, a symbol of his authority. And so it was the 7th war bond drive, and the Reno Chamber of Commerce said, if you contribute to the war bond drive, we'll build a saddle for the admiral. And so they did. And so the best saddle maker in the area was involved, and the best silversmith in the area was involved, and they produced a saddle, and it went to Fallon and was pictured on an airplane there, and also on the bar at the Officers Club. It went to Pyramid Lake, where the Paiute tribe produced some gloves for the admiral.
Oh yeah, the gauntlets. Yeah.
It went to Chicago, and it was there as the war was coming to an end, and it was taken by the Navy and taken out to the Pacific and delivered to the admiral. The admiral said other people tried to get in on what Nevada had done, and the admiral wrote in his autobiography that his cabin started to look like a tack room. He never did ride the horse, but when he came back to the United States, he donated the saddle to his alma mater, the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis. It was there for years. People came down to see it. President Truman went to see it while he was in office. It was on display for about 50 years, and they decided that it was not of interest any longer, and they put it in their museum attic. When I read the stories, I went to Annapolis and I talked to the people there, and they were most interested in loaning it to the state of Nevada, so it's home. And the saddle had been damaged, and the damage needed to be repaired. And so they loaned it to us. It's still here. The damage was repaired. I hope we keep it forever.
Yeah. And wasn't it Bulls and Butler was the saddle maker here in Reno,
Yes,
if I
yes.
remember correctly. Okay.
I think he
And
was on Second Street.
yeah, and they don't know where the gauntlet gloves are, correct? That might have
That's
been
right.
something that was kept, or
Yeah.
It's hard to know.
yeah,
The gauntlets, the gloves went missing,
yeah.
and I've talked to Admiral Halsey's family, and they have no knowledge of what might have happened to them.
It was
Okay.
the local tribe around here that produced those gloves.
Yeah, it was the Paiutes. The
Yeah.
gloves were picked up at Nixon.
Um, so someone had a question here for you. Can you talk a little bit more how the silver was used as a pad coating? Because you gave such a great description of the thickness and the length. Is it lined in the bomb
No,
to
they was
understand a little bit better?
to separate the right uranium from the wrong uranium. They
Oh,
needed U-235.
okay.
Okay, and they needed huge electromagnets to do the separation. And so the amount of electricity that went into those electromagnets was huge. And the silver was used to make what they called bus bars. And a bus bar is a piece of metal that conducts electricity that's able to conduct huge amounts of electricity. And that's what the silver was used for.
Oh, okay. All right. That explains it a little bit more. Oh, that was amazing. Um, and we're excited. Definitely, we'll want to have you come to the Historical Society once your book is been published as well. But this was great. Is there, Neil, do you have a question or a comment you wanted
Just
to
wanted to
talk
ask
about?
the judge, did you cover other materials? And the tungsten is the one I wanted to get to because of its high melting. It was used for armament, piercing, metal piercing, armor piercing, and it was used to make armor on the vehicles and stuff too. So I hope, did you cover it in the book? That's what I'm asking.
I covered the amount of tungsten that was produced. I cover a number of other minerals that were produced as well.
And Nevada was the big source for the tungsten.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, in Reno, we had a place where they repaired tanks and vehicles, armored vehicles.
Well, they had a place where they on the assembling of it over there on where it's Wells Avenue, that Evett lumber that was there, and that big dock. Says, why would anybody have that great big concrete block? And what it was for was to offload the tank to go ahead and have whatever was going to be put on at that time put back on the railroad car and shot to the next place. They assembled them point by point by point going across the nation.
The eastern boundary of Reno at that time was where Washoe Med was, now renowned.
Yeah.
And the plant where they repaired vehicles was just east of the hospital.
Well, where the Spice Girls was, the ice house, it was right down in there, was that monstrous dock that was alongside the railroad tracks.
I need you to drive me over there and show that to me, Neil.
They blew it apart to go ahead and put retrack in.
That's what happens with history.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're very familiar with that. What a wonderful program, and then I'll get out of the way. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Jack.
And I
See you
know
tomorrow.
I just see you tomorrow. I do have a question, and I know you have to get off to do your normal job here in a few minutes. But can you just tell me how many minerals in total were they pulling from Nevada for the war effort? I mean, there's quite a few you were talking about, but I was just curious if you say 12 or how many there were in the end.
I believe in my book I talk about 10.
Oh, okay. It's quite a bit. So I was just curious. So,
Quite a bit.
all right.
We have a greater variety of minerals in the state of Nevada than anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, we do. Well, this was a wonderful talk, and thank you so much It was so informative, and definitely looking forward to when your book comes out. So
I started to lose my voice during it. I apologize.
No, it was really good. So we appreciate it. So thank you so much, Chuck Weller. And thank you, everybody that joined us today. This was a great talk, and we appreciate you being here. And we'll turn it, and as always, thank you, Washoe County Library. So let me turn it back to Jennifer.
Thank you all, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Chuck Weller, Sherry Hayes-Zorn, and Neil Cobb with the Nevada Historical Society, and John, our Washoe County Library System tech wizard, for making this event possible today. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.